We're live. We have Dr. Joel Rosenbloom on, and I don't think I've ever called a guest doctor before. But it's so funny. It's like I can't call Dr. Rosenbloom by his first name. I just feel like it's wrong. So Dr. Rosenbloom is an instructor at my school. He's now the head of student life. So keeping us dental students happy and healthy. Um, I'd say personally, Dr. Rosenbloom has been one of the um, single biggest reasons why I think I rekindled my love for dentistry, and I wouldn't ever say that about anyone, but when they say the people you're surrounded with are the ones that have the most impact on you and your product of your environment. I've been lucky enough to become friends, and I would say we're friends, right, Dr. Rosenbloom?
Yep, Friday afternoons, or Friday afternoon walks.
We have our walks back from clinic together, and it just gets the weekend started on the right note. But truly, Dr. Rosenbloom, you've been a really good and really great influence on me in the dental sphere, which I'm forever grateful for. But that's not why you're on this podcast, because you're on this podcast because I think I know you well, U of T knows you well, but I think more people need to know you well because you have such an incredible story with your mission trips through Africa and I wouldn't even call them mission trips. You truly lived in Africa, but we're so excited to have you on the show.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. I'm thrilled and honored, as I said. So thank you very much.
Dr. Rosenbloom, why don't you just kind of give the audience the teaser of your career and where you came from and how that influenced you and the decision to be an instructor now.
Well, I'd always had an interest in teaching. Teaching came to me at an early age. I was a camp counselor, and that's a form of teaching. So I wove teaching through everything I did, from being a camp counselor through university. I worked my way through university by being a tutorial assistant in statistics, biology, and then I taught arts and crafts at University of Western Ontario and the Arts and Crafts Center. And I knew that it would somehow be a part of my career. But the main, I guess, side to my career is when you say I did these mission trips in Africa, it was a little different for me, because I would actually categorically say I've never done a mission trip. A mission trip I see as you go for a short period of time, you do a burst of energy, a burst of work, a burst of clinical activity, and you do as much as you can and you leave. I'd always had this deep-seated drive from as young as I can remember to go to Africa, to work in Africa, as a doctor or a dentist. It was something that drove me from easily the age of 8. And I guess my biggest inspiration was Albert Schweitzer, because I read about him as a kid, and then I started reading about Africa, and I became truly and utterly entranced, and I would say at some point obsessed with that part of the world. I read about it. I was aware of it. I even went so far as to memorize all of the capital cities of every country in Africa, and I learned
I
so
did the
much.
exact same thing.
Is that right? Wow. I never met anyone.
I used to live in Africa, and
Is that right?
I had the continent, and it was like, what's the capital of this? And every night
Yeah.
I hear exactly.
Wow,
That's awesome.
That's hilarious.
But the map changes
Yeah.
so much there, so you don't know
Yeah.
what version you're looking at, right?
It's still changing, right? There's still changes to date. So that's what drove me through dental school, and it wasn't. It was more of a to go there and to live and to work, and all through dental school, which I relate to you, Akil, how difficult it was. It was easily sounding as difficult for me, but the thing that drove me through dental school is I knew once I graduated, then I could realize my dream, and I went there in third year, and then I went back as soon as I graduated to work in Sudan in 1984 during the Ethiopian famine, and lived by the Ethiopian border. It was extraordinarily difficult, and then followed that by going to live in Mozambique for almost 3 years as a dentist for the government, and on and on and on. So that was and each of those places that I worked, a big part of what I did was teaching. in Mozambique. I helped to set up a national training school there's no dental school in Mozambique. We train mid-level dental workers. So we train them in 2-3 year courses to do some pretty basic dentistry. It was a government sanctioned course. And in Ethiopia, I trained one Ethiopian refugee in the refugee camp village where I lived to do oral hygiene and extractions after I left. So every trip was based entirely on leaving something behind. I wanted to always leave the place with some ongoing work. So that's kind of and then coming to U of T was a natural fit. When I came back from Mozambique, I immediately started teaching here. And I've been teaching here since 1980.
So Joel, explain this to me. So I've been on, and this actually fits great with our last episode, which was on mission trips. And I've been on a ton of mission trips, and you go there exactly like you said, a burst of clinical activity. But we were talking, Akil and I were talking last week, and we were saying how unsustainable these trips actually are, because there's no follow-up, there's no continuum of care. You go in, emergent dental care, and you peace out, and you don't know what happens. And so you're like, am I doing more harm than I'm doing good? And my number one thing I've always wanted to say was, we need to start training local people to help pick up where we leave off. And so you're doing that. Can you tell me, like, how did you even go about doing that?
Well, it was always something I wanted to do. I wouldn't say it was easy to find, because as you know, if you flip through the pages at the back of the CDA journal, there's not exactly a host of countries in Africa, for example, calling for dentists to come set up training programs. When I was living in Sudan training, things got very, very, very difficult there. I got very sick with malaria, and I had to leave because of a combination of the political situation.
That was my next question. How many times you had malaria? Yeah,
that was the only time, but it was pretty intense. Like I would say near death. It was a very life-threatening situation. And as I left, I was thinking, what's the next thing? I knew went back to Toronto, and for 1.5 years, I planned my next trip. And I'd always been interested in Mozambique. I don't know if you know much about Mozambique, either of you. I'm not being condescending. It's just that most people do not know about Mozambique. Mozambique is a former Portuguese colony. There were 5 Portuguese colonies in Africa, and it was colonized for 500 years. And it was bordering on South Africa. So it was in the shadow of apartheid. And Mozambique fought a liberation struggle from 1962 and gained independence at 1975. When it gained independence, it became a really doctrinaire Marxist country. And it reorganized and nationalized everything. And it did phenomenal things. Infant mortality dropped, education rose, vaccine coverage grew. It was truly a mecca, and probably the single most successful Black independent country in all of Africa. Everybody who was in the left-wing sphere went to Mozambique. I went to Mozambique and joined the Frelimo government, which was the party that fought the liberation movement and took over power in 1975. And I went there as basically to join the Frelimo revolution as a dentist. So I went there and became a dentist for Frelimo in the middle part of the country. But the negative side of it was, because of the way things are in Africa, and South Africa in particular, creating such a sway over the southern part of the continent, South Africa funded a rebel movement to fight the Frelimo government. And when I went, it was really in the midst of a civil war. So for the 2.5 to 3 years that I lived there, it was in the middle of a very, very, probably one of Africa's most brutal civil wars at the time. So but my goal was to train, to teach, and to work in the hospital and the dental clinic, but train local workers, but to open this national training center. So it was a fascinating time. Everybody of note in intellectual academic circles who were progressive and left not many went to Mozambique. So it was a place where there weren't many foreigners, but the ones who were there to support the Frelimo government. And so you had this phenomenal, crucible of all this left-wing ideology and all these movements, and the country was changing and the war was raging, and apartheid was crumbling south of the border. So it was akin to watching history in the making, because the revolution slowly got brought to its knees. Apartheid died, and this was all happening while I was there. So I was in the middle of all this. Anyways, Akil, sorry to interrupt you. You had
Oh no, one thing I've always found interesting about you and hearing your stories, and Neki, Dr. Rosenbloom does these Africa talks where he talks about his career. They're probably one of the best attended lectures, including mandatory lectures at the school. But what I've always found interesting is no matter what situation you're in, whether it be when you're in Africa, or when you're in a dental school, or when you're doing your work at CAMH, which we'll get into, you find yourself trying to do good in a call it macroeconomic, or like in a macro sense. You kind of have to just trek along and be okay with doing the thing that you're doing, kind of knowing that you don't have control over all the various, I'll call them macroeconomic forces, but they're obviously not macroeconomic forces. These macro forces that are kind of beyond your level of control. How do you stay motivated when you kind of know that you have this sort of impact that you can make, but all the while there's these other pieces that you can't really control that are influencing the outcome?
That's a great question. In Mozambique, it was tough. It was tough to stay motivated at times, because the war really affected everything that we did. In the city, we were safe. When we went out of the city, we were not. But I think what motivated me is I went for a reason, and I didn't lose sight of the goal. My goal was eventually to hope to see the school open, which it did. And everything I did was helping in that little way, whether I, worked in the hospital, and, maybe I did some wiring of fractures, and whatever I did it wouldn't have been done if I wasn't there. I don't mean to sound self-aggrandizing, but there were not a lot of trained people there at the time. So it wasn't difficult to stand out with the skills I had, because there wasn't a competitive field there. So I felt very much appreciated, and there was a lot of gratification shown to me in many, many ways. And I think in Mozambique in particular, I was really in love with the country. I made some phenomenally close friends. I had a life there. I had an apartment. I had a job. I went to my job. It was just like living in Toronto, but there just happened to be a revolution and a war. So.
But this just blows my mind away. Like, there's an actual revolution and a war, and here you are, like, trying to start a dental program. And I always feel like, at the end of the day, we're just dentists. Like, we fix teeth. Yeah, we make smiles. We build confidence. We get people out of pain. But like, man, it's like there's a war going around us, and I have to applaud you for like sticking to it. And like, I want to bring a school. But like, did you feel like you're on an island? Like there's so much more going up around you. Like, did you have a team with you? How did that work?
I mean, I just want to be clear. I didn't go there to build the school. I went there knowing the idea was underway, and it was in progress. And so I went there to participate in it. So I don't want to take credit for it, but to go back to your question, I guess I was always looking for the edge. I was not a run of the mill. I was not shying away from it. I was always kind of looking for the edge, and I was looking for excitement. And I mean,
you like the adventure.
Careless. I love the adventure. I went out.
I resonate with that. That's amazing.
More than just about anybody else. I traveled on the roads that were possibly mined. I traveled on the roads that were ambushed. I went to the places that were, I came upon, attacks. One time I went on a dental visit to an isolated place. And when we got there, a truck pulled in, and there were, half a dozen people, one unfortunately dead child, and other people who were hit by bullets, and et cetera, et cetera. And it just happened up the road. And then we went up the same road an hour later to look at a clinic. And I questioned them. I said, are you sure we should be traveling up the road? Is this where the attack was? And Mozambicans being Mozambicans, it's okay. So I kind of liked the edge. I found that, but it did come with a lot of near misses. It came with a lot of very scary moments. There was no question about it. I remember once driving on the one road called the corridor, and we got stuck by car trouble. And the last 2 hours we were driving at night, and people didn't drive hardly during the day, but at night it was absolutely forbidden because it was a war zone. We drove through it in the dark with our headlights off. Because headlights attract gunners, and and I kept thinking, I mean, what's worse, hitting an elephant or being hit by a bazooka? It was, those 2 hours were two of the scariest hours in my life, and I was sitting in the back of a pickup truck of all places. So I did these things. I mean, after I did them, I breathed a sigh of relief. But at the time, I was a little bit, I don't know, I was a little bit cavalier at times, I guess, because I really had this almost senseless desire to see the war and experience it. I don't know why, but I did. So it was a place to be, no question about it.
What is it about you that, like, in terms of like a personality component, what is it about you that attracts you to these unorthodox things, whether it's going to Africa, working at CAMH, you've done a ton in poverty dentistry. What is it about you that attracts you to that?
Well, I mean, I guess I didn't come from a rich family, so I know what it's like to grow up without having anything and everything you want. So I know some deprivation, but I also knew that when I went into dentistry, I wanted to do something different. I wanted to make a difference. I didn't want to follow the path. I wanted to go on the path least traveled. And as I started thinking about what I wanted to do, I realized there weren't that many dentists who wanted to, say, work in a psychiatric hospital, or who wanted to, go to work in Sudan during the Ethiopian famine. So there wasn't a lot of competition. I didn't have to be that good. I just had to be daring and bold. And I guess I always had this feeling in the back of my mind that once I earned these 3 letters, DDS, I saw it as one, a ticket to adventure, a ticket to travel, and a ticket to make a difference. So in my own mind, I always wanted to make an impact. Not to say that people who don't run clinics, who aren't really great dentists, who don't see lots of patients, of course they make an impact. But I think I was always drawn to work on a broader scale, such as that was the enticement of Mozambique, knowing that I would be helping to work to build the only training center for dental workers in a country of 14 million people. Without this, there were no dental workers being trained, 0. So things like that really, really, really excited me to be able to operate on such a large scale. I was always like a pie in the sky thinker, I guess. A lot of the ideas never went anywhere, but some had traction and actually kind of came to fruition.
An entrepreneur.
I'm a dreamer, Akil. I was always a dreamer.
Just listening to you, I hear impact, and I hear that's kind of how I just take this conversation, and you're a man of impact. And I want to ask you, when you see, because you're at U of T, you see a lot of dental students and newly graduated dentists, with a ton of debt, riding high in nice cars and in all these $1 million condos, and they start their lives and they go to work immediately. and they're always in this rat race, but there's no impact. How do you try to judge the student coming, not judge, but how do you try to impact these students to maybe look at the broader picture and maybe show them that there's a life beyond just dentistry at home?
Well, I know I'm older than both of you, probably put together, and I've seen the dental students, and I would say in the last 10 years, I've seen a very huge change in the interest in dental students at U of T, actually across the country, because we're now connecting to other universities. And I think there's a far stronger desire for dental students to be involved in social change. And I can give the easiest example, which Akil knows well, is we started about 4 years ago this NOMA action group, and the work that these students are doing, it's off the charts. The caring and the interest to go to Ethiopia. I'm going to Ethiopia in a week or two with 2 fourth-year students, and I would say that students really care. But you've hit the nub. You've hit the crux of the issue. As much as they care, they graduate with debt loads that are huge, and they can't really easily disentangle that from them. So they can't go and live. I could go and live in Mozambique because I graduated with a student loan of $6,000 after 8 years of university. So it wasn't the same as what these guys are doing. But I think of the changes in the last 10 years with the Africa talks that we're doing, and with the CAMH rotations and the education on mental health. And I mean, I don't get too involved in what they do after. I just take solace in the fact that there's no question that the students are graduating now with a thirst and a hunger for a meaningful existence, a meaningful career. And the best example I can give is right now we have a dentist who we hired at CAMH 1 year ago. And she graduated only 2 years ago. She was my student, and she always wanted to work there. She graduated and went up north. She came back and we connected. We brought her on, and she's there 3 days a week, and she is having the time of her life. She is doing phenomenal dentistry, 100% socially conscious, treating, the poorest, psych patients are the poorest people in society, period, bar none. There's nobody poorer than a psych patient. That's a fact. Because most of them are either homeless or living on the edge. And she is doing all this dentistry, and she's still kind of working 2 days in private practice. So I don't think so much, necky about all the dental grads and what they're doing, but the fact that many of them are graduating with a thirst for putting quality of life first, wealth endowment second, way more than, 10, 15, 20 years ago. That's enough for me. And if they want to call me, which some do, and ask how they can get involved now that they're feeling a little more on top of their debt, I'll talk to them and help steer them towards something socially conscious. So I don't know if I answered your question, but
it's interesting
totally
too, because you said something that was you kind of glossed over it, but I thought was really insightful into the person you are. You said you're a dreamer, and I love hearing I love hearing what makes people tick, because in order to pursue a career in poverty dentistry, in order to pursue anything really with any amount of passion, you need to be ambitious about it. You need to be, whether you come at it from the point of view of the dreamer, whether you come at it from a point of view of X, Y, or Z, there's reasons why people do what they do. What made you a dreamer, like from the beginning? Because that's something that's inherent to yourself.
I think probably when I was a kid, I read a lot. I was immersed in books, and I dreamt a lot about places that I read. So, the books I read took me to places that I wasn't able to go to. So I think reading has always had a strong influence on me, no question about it. And I can't think of anything else. Probably that. And it certainly wasn't my family, because I can't exactly say my parents were saying, you should go work in Mozambique. They were quite the opposite. They were happy that I went, but they weren't exactly pushing me to do that. So I think my biggest inspiration is reading.
I asked because, well, I'll share a personal anecdote about myself. Someone once told me, like, I'm not present. Like, I'm not ever present because I'm always thinking about the next thing. I'm always thinking about, okay, what can I do with this? How can I basically conform the world to the way I want to see it, kind of thing, right? Like, I'm very much like you. I'm a dreamer, right? And I gave that so much thought. I'm like, why can I never be present? And it's because, back when I was a child, I was bullied a lot. So the only way I could, my coping mechanism was constantly living in the future, constantly thinking ahead and saying,
Right.
okay, one day this will get better. This will eventually clear up and life will be good. And I just got stuck in that, little, 15-year-old Akil got stuck in that mindset of, I'm always going to be in the future. I'm never going to be fully present because the present is just too tough to deal with. But it's funny because people come at it from different angles. What about you, Neki? You're also a dreamer. You always have these massive ambitions that, yeah, you do. You're not cutting yourself enough. You're not cutting yourself enough slack.
I honestly, I see Dr. Rosenbloom here, and I'm like, man, I feel like I started the path of trying to make change, and I dabbled in fundraising for water wells and the dental thing, but I feel like I cut my ability to create real change short, and I chose to work and just do short trips. And I feel like that's the path a lot of dentists take, because you're right, Dr. Rosenberg, we all want to help. We just need an avenue or an opportunity to help and to create change any way that we know how, right? And so when I hear you speak, I'm just like in awe of, like, you're the dude actually creating the change. You were hands on the ground during a revolution, like creating change, fighting for dentistry amongst a war. It just blows my mind away that people like you exist. And I just want to know, like, how, like, from thinking about, yeah, I want to go to this area and having that dream, like, how does one even make that a reality? Like, who are you talking to on LinkedIn? Like I know back then there was like, there probably wasn't internet during Mozambique's revolution. So like,
No, there was.
yeah. So like, how do you even begin that?
Well, like everything, a lot of it is serendipity, right? And when I was leaving, when I was like winding things up in Sudan, someone said to me, it was a passing comment, and said, have you ever heard of the book Where There's No Doctor? Have you guys ever heard of this?
No.
Famous book, written not by a doctor, but written by a biology professor who's since been disgraced for reasons that we won't go into. But the book itself stands as a great book. And it was written for village health workers to deal with medical problems. It was translated into like 30 languages, and it was full of pictures. It's the most non-academic looking book. It's a village healthcare manual. Anyways, it's quite famous. Google Where There's No Doctor. He told me when I was leaving Sudan, he said, there's a dentist who I met in Papua New Guinea who sort of reminds me of you, and he's in the process of finishing and publishing a book called Where There's No Dentist. And he's from Canada. He's from Saskatchewan. And he gave me his name. And when I got back to Canada, I looked him up and I got in touch with him. And we talked.
Who was it?
His name is Murray Dixon.
Oh, okay.
He used to teach at the dental school in Saskatchewan.
Yeah, that's where I went to school.
But he wasn't like a faculty. He ran the part of the international program. So he wasn't really in the middle of the faculty. He was there really to run this international program. He's well known in Saskatoon. Anyways, so I got in touch with him, and he had just returned, well, a year or two before, from living in Mozambique. And he was writing this book. And I was aware of Mozambique. I was interested in Mozambique, and I was curious to go. And as we talked, one thing led to another. And it was basically the position he had in the town that he lived in, that they'd set up a program, and it was just drifting into Nowhereville. And it was through the connection with him that I ended up going to Mozambique. So I may have gone there, but I may have gone somewhere else. But as soon as I heard Mozambique, I knew about the Frelimo Revolution. I knew about what was going on, but I sort of sunk myself into reading more about the details of the post-revolution. And I mean, what was going on there for the first 6 or 7 years was probably one of the most unparalleled societal changes in the world, bar none. Many people would say that. And it started falling apart in the early 80s when South Africa started pumping money into the rebels to destabilize the country, and the war just totally destroyed the country. So that's how I kind of ended up in Mozambique, through my connection with him. And Sudan, it was the same thing. I knew when I was in third year dental school, I saw an article in a journal about Cameroon, and I wanted to go there. I always had this desire to go to Cameroon. I don't know why, because West Africa's cool. And I wrote a letter to the dentist and asked, hey, like, I'm going to graduate in a year, blah, 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 blah. And it never panned out. That's fine. But then when I was graduating, getting ready to do something, it was at the time, I know you're younger, but do you remember the Ethiopian famine? Do you remember much about it? It's the Bob Geldof years, right? The song, the Live Aid, the first Live Aid concert. Do they even know it's Christmas? You know that it was the biggest, the biggest issue in the world in the 80s. 1 million people died. It was massive. And so it was in the news every single day, the Ethiopian famine, how many people were dying, et cetera, et cetera. And same sort of thing. I read about it, and I noticed that there was a small organization called Canadian Physicians for African Refugees. And they were setting up a small clinic inside just inside the Sudanese border near Ethiopia. And so I got in touch with them, and they said to me, hey, if you make your way over there, you can work there. So I slowly traveled overland and made my way. It was a long, complicated, difficult, dangerous trip. And I made my way there. And it was, when I arrived, it was a small African village, which was my dream. And there was the refugee center. And I mean, I arrived there, and it was really, I honestly felt like I had found my dream. I thought if I didn't get sick, I would have stayed there for a long time. Or if the war, actually, I got asked to leave because of the complexities of the war. So it was a combination of illness and political, extradition or whatever. So they were all, a lot of these things happened by always keeping my radar. And same thing at the dental school. I'm in charge of the Ethiopia program. 10 years ago, the dean here wanted to join this Ethiopia program at the university, teaching at the dental school. And I'd heard only from a colleague that he wanted to do this. So I wrote him a letter, and I sent him some of the, articles I published from where I worked there. And I asked him if I could be involved. And he said yes. And he then called me up and asked me if I would head it up. So again, it was something I chased and then was given. So a lot of real happenstance, always kind of scanning the horizon, looking for those really, little cherries to pick off the tree.
Creating your own opportunities. I love that.
Yeah,
I think that's
it was exactly that. Looking for things that would get me where I wanted to go. I don't know.
Now I got to ask you a question here. Akil and I were talking, and I'm going to throw out a scenario to you. Okay. So 20 Canadians go to Africa. They go to Ethiopia. Okay. The plane ticket, $2,000 each. Ground costs, say $2,000 for a week, including transportation. You're paying local people. So say you're spending $4,000 as a Canadian going there, and there's 20 of you. So now it's $80,000. Okay. My point here is that a group of 20 Canadians are going to go do 4 days of clinic in Ethiopia for $80,000. And they're going to come home and they're going to say they went on a short-term dental brigade and they provide emergent care. And that's great. But Akil and I were talking, we were saying, well, that $80,000 could have been spent a little bit more efficiently. had they done something like train local people, like put the $80,000 towards training local sustainable care. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I don't, let me be clear. I think there's a role for us as you know, Canadians to play. Otherwise, I wouldn't go to
Yeah.
Ethiopia. I do think there's a role, but I think the role has to be thought through. It has to be respectful, and it has to give, you know, credit to what's been done and not be condescending. So yes, that $80,000. If you sent, like I'm going with two students, if you sent a small team over, and most of the money, you know, a team of two, maybe three people, and most of the money was used to help invest in infrastructure, in educational materials, and anything to do with training, then you'd get a lot more bang for your buck. But I don't know. I guess because mission trips, I've never done a mission trip. I hear about them all the time. I've just never done one. So I don't. I guess I don't get it because I've never had a desire to do it. It's just not my thing. I don't say they're. I'm not speaking negatively. It's just not my thing.
No, and I totally hear that, and I struggle with that too, because my girlfriend, she works in development. She's amazing, and she questions like what we do on these short-term brigades, and she's like, you know, are we doing the right thing?
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, and Dr. Rosenbloom, I have to ask you the question: what is sustainable change? Like, what is sustainable oral health impact? As I see it right in front of me, but like, what is it in your eyes? How do we create that long-term impact?
Well, going back to when I went to Sudan, It was a small health center, you know, 5 traditional dwellings, and I could have gone there and the whole time done what I did: extract teeth, did oral hygiene. But I immediately looked for someone who was trainable, capable, and interested. And right from the get-go, I brought one person on board, and the whole time I was there, he was with me. He was sort of my assistant, my shadow, my person. And so I more or less trained him to do extractions. I trained him to diagnose simple diseases, and we had classes every afternoon. And this was with zero resources. I mean, I had the most basic resources in the world. I mean, we were sterilizing instruments in a pressure cooker. We had, you know, I don't know, maybe
That's
3,
still
4
how
sets.
it's done.
Yeah, we were doing it with the most basics, and I didn't even have. I don't even think I had any books. I was drawing pictures to train him, and then I get a letter from him after I came back. I don't know, 2 or 3 months later, and he says to me, you know, I've been using everything you've done since you left. I've extracted 60 teeth. I've kept them in a jar, and you know, to me, you know, on the smallest of small scales, at least I left something behind. With no funds, no money, I had no budget, zero budget. I left something behind. Is it sustainable?
I like that.
It's not going to sustain the country, but it's going to help the people in that refugee camp a little bit.
So most of the listeners to this podcast are young, maybe new dentists, some dental students. But a lot of people want to do good, but I don't know if necessarily they could pick up and move to a different continent and sort of do what you did. So what would you recommend for a dentist, say working 9 to 5, that just wants to do some good, make some social change, have some impact? What could they do in their, you know, hours? Because we have this tangible skill that we can use and leverage, right? Like we know how to work with our hands. So what could those people do?
Well, I mean, you know, the old saying, think locally, act globally, right? Or think globally, act locally, maybe one or the other. I mean, a lot of dentists in Toronto don't, for example, and I'm going to probably get called out on this, don't want to see patients on ODSP. They just don't. And I hear stories every week.
What's ODSP?
Oh, right. You know, it's Ontario Disability Support Program. It's basically provincial welfare.
Yeah. Okay.
And a lot of dentists don't want to see them. And I know I'm going to get called out on this, Many do, but don't. So you're a dentist in Toronto. Find a way to make your clinic open and accessible to people living in poverty. That's one simple thing to do. Maybe you spend an afternoon a week and go to or a month and go to one of the homeless shelters and do free dental exams and try and get people to your clinic and just try and make an impact in your local clinic. Now, talking globally, if you're going to go on a mission trip, which again I don't dissuade, try and find a way to. I had a student in your class, not at your class, third year, Akil, come to me, said, I'm going on a mission trip this summer, but I want to do something different. So I sat with her for an hour and a half at lunch, and I gave her a ton of resources, a ton of leads, and I said, connect with the infant child program close to where you're going to be working. There will be one. All health centers in developing countries have infant child programs. And work with the mothers of newborns and teach them how to clean their children's teeth. Doing something like that, you may stop one case of NOMA. Huge. Go to the local schools and work with the teachers to implement some simple curriculum about oral health. Start to not just do the clinical, but work outside of the dental clinic and spread your wings and go and see the other connections. And even if you only go on a 2-week mission trip, your impact will be that much bigger because you will have worked with healthcare workers and teachers to help to spread the word of why it's important to do what we think they should do.
So do you feel like the education aspect of a short-term mission trip is more important than the emergent care aspect?
No, I think they're kind of both together, because if you go on a mission trip, there's an expectation you're going to do clinical care. If you go there and you don't do clinical care, they don't want you, because there's kind of an expectation. And I think it's like in Mozambique. If I just went there and I just did education, I taught the dental workers, I taught the nurses, I worked on the National Training Center, I wouldn't have credibility. I gained my credibility by working in the hospital. I gained my credibility by working in the outpatient clinic. That's how I gained credibility. So you have to have a base. And the base is, in a mission trip, the base is maybe the mornings you do clinical work, the afternoons you do some type of outreach work. But I do think on some level, the clinical work is how you establish a certain degree of respect, understanding, credibility, and people kind of trust you and they want to go to you. If you just go and don't do that, I have a feeling people would lose interest and lose respect quickly. So it is important, don't get me wrong.
Dr. Rosenbloom, I got a question for you, because I'll give you a little bit of background. Okay. In 2015, I came back from, I want to say like my 6th or 8th dental brigade to Guatemala or somewhere in Central America. And I used to travel around all there, and we do these short-term dental brigades. And I came home, like every year it would get harder and harder. And I came home completely depressed. And I didn't want, like, it ruined my relationship. It ruined my work life. Like I just couldn't get over it, that I live in a life of, like, I was just blessed with so much. And I'm able to pay my way to go down there, help for a week, and then, come home and be expected to just fit right in with normal Canadian life, because I found it very difficult. Have you experienced that? Like, have you experienced the polar opposites of going to Africa and then expected to come back home and as if, like, you can just live a life in Canada after you've seen everything that goes on in developing countries like you have?
Yeah, of course. When I came back from Mozambique, I was a basket case. I couldn't, simple thing, because of the war and the deprivation, stores were pretty well empty, where they'd have 1 or 2 products. The shelf would be filled with the same product. That was all it would have. So there wasn't much available. So, you didn't have a lot of choice. So I couldn't do the simplest things like go into a supermarket. I was overwhelmed by the magnitude of choice. I had to ask people to shop for me. I couldn't carry on certain conversations. It took me a really, really long time after moving back to Toronto from Mozambique to actually settle in and adjust. It was difficult. It was really difficult. The thing that helped me more than anything is I had some friends from Toronto living in Mozambique, working with me, and they were back in Toronto around the same time. So seeing them made all the difference in the world, because we both experienced similar times, so we could understand each other. But yes, I've seriously experienced that.
So how do we bridge these two worlds? Because I'm a bit torn, I'm a good guy, right? I love people. I love service. I've done multiple mission trips. I really love volunteering, and it's something I've done my whole life, and I still continue to do it. But then there's this other side of me that makes me the devil to a lot of, folks in, socially conscious dentistry and volunteer dentistry, which is I'm also a finance guy, right? I used to work on Bay Street. So there's these two elements that are at odds. And I feel like I'm a microcosm of a much bigger problem, which is in dentistry, really in any profession, there's these two camps, right? It's the camps that want to do good, and then there's the camps that, want to make money. And those two camps never get along, but have a ton to learn from each other. Perfect example. I just recently got back from a service trip, right? And I'm involved with a couple of charities in Toronto. And, there's so many times where I'm thinking to myself, it's a nonprofit, so it doesn't run as efficiently as it could. I have a background in consulting and finance, but, those two things don't usually mesh well together. So how do we bring these two worlds together and say, okay, there's a lot that can be learned from folks in volunteer dentistry, socially conscious dentistry that can be applied to, capitalist dentistry, call it. And there's a lot of things that can be applied from capitalist dentistry to, nonprofit volunteer dentistry. How do we bridge those two gaps? Because there's so much that can be learned from one another.
Yeah, I mean, in dentistry, it's a little trickier, but I'll give you one example. Does the name Michael Wilson ring a bell?
No.
Michael Wilson remember Brian Mulroney? Does that ring a bell? Prime Minister years ago. He was Brian Mulroney's finance minister. So rich guy, rich, well-connected guy. Michael Wilson, he's from your neck of the woods, Neki. I think he's from Alberta.
Like all good people are.
Rich guy, really rich guy. I always thought he was just a slimy kind of rich guy. But Michael Wilson had, he paid the ultimate price. Focused his life and all his wealth and all his connections on mental health, and he poured so much. I have a feeling he lived in Toronto in the later years. He poured so much money and energy into CAMH, helping CAMH, financially become what it is, helping CAMH in so many ways. And so even though he was, a very rich person, in the end, he kind of, when he died, which was a year or two ago, I had a complete 180 on the guy, because when he died, the CAMH community, the outpouring of grief, it was very real. So I think what a lot of wealthy people do, I don't know so much in dentistry, is they, they'll sit on boards and they'll use their contacts and their influences to sort of help organizations that are struggling survive, and lend their financial acumen and expertise to these organizations. Now, dentistry, that doesn't help as much, because most dentists are standalone for-profits, and most nonprofit dental things are government funded, so they don't tend to have boards. So for dentistry, I'm not quite sure how that would translate, but there's a lot of organizations in Toronto, for example, that provide dental services to low-income people, and someone such as you sitting on a board of an organization such as, the Meeting Place or Sistering or St. Christopher House, and helping them bring your financial expertise would go a long way. So it's kind of using your skills to help them improve their ability to serve the people they serve. That's the only way that comes to mind.
So I'm curious. We have this new Canadian dental plan, Canadian dental program starting up, trying to find its legs.
Yeah.
In a perfect world, or maybe even in today's world, how would you frame the current system to get the biggest bang for its buck? Or have you thought about how the provision of dental services in Canada should be made?
I mean, I've always been a proponent of dentistry being a part of the national health insurance, Medicare, Dentacare, like across the board for everyone. I've always been against the fact that dentistry is segregated, it's isolated, it's not considered part of the body. But I understand why, when the Canada Health Act came into being, why dentistry wasn't included. One, the profession didn't really push for it; they didn't want it. And two, the medical profession pushed only for hospital services and physician reimbursement. And so all the trade-offs led to those two things only. And I've always thought, to me, whenever that was, I think in the early 60s, that was the biggest lost opportunity. So I do feel that that would have been a national dental program for all ages, not just children, would have been the best situation. I believe in nationalization.
So in today's, like, do you ever see something like that happening?
No. The trend isn't going in that direction.
Totally.
Look at why,
what can we do?
Look at why this one came into being. It was like it was a marriage of convenience,
absolutely.
right? So it wasn't like
to keep the government in power, of course.
Yeah, it wasn't like people were saying we're worried about the poor and their teeth, right? It was totally opportunistic. So, I mean, never stop fighting for it. It's a fight. Yeah. I'll fight till the day I die. Will it happen? Probably not, but that's why I go to places like Mozambique, where I can see it actually happening more. Here, I mean, the new program's good, and anything they do is welcome, and it's moving in the right direction. But I don't think it's. I don't follow it as much anymore, because my mind is more in psychiatry, mental health services, and global health. So I used to follow it and be a strong advocate for all of the changes at the provincial and national level, but I've sort of turned away from that because I got more.
There you go again. That was what I was talking about. You're okay to fight the good fight, even though it might not be in your favor. You might not have the odds on your side.
Oh yeah, I will. I still go to meetings when people ask me to be involved in doing things to try and advocate the government. I'll never say no. I'll always fight the fight. But I don't think we're going to see any huge changes in my lifetime.
Well, I'm still in awe of you fighting that good fight, whether it's on that front in Mozambique, with me at U of T. So you're fighting the good fight, Dr. Rosenbloom. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. We really enjoyed hearing your story, and I'm sure the listeners too. I think they deserve to hear a story like this. So thank you so much for coming on.
No, thank you both. It's been a real pleasure. It's nice to meet you, Neki. I've heard a lot about you from McGill, so it's really nice to meet you. And thanks, guys.
I'm sad now. Dr. Rosenbloom has a different clinic schedule, so our Friday afternoon walk. We're gonna have to turn it into like a Monday lunch walk or something. We're gonna have to find it, put it back in the schedule.
Yeah, it was a nice way to end the week, but maybe it'll come back.
Let's hope for it. All righty. Have a good
thanks, guys. Okay.
Have a good rest of your night.
We'll see you later. Thanks a lot.
Bye.
All right. See ya.
See you later.
Bye.
Welcome to the Hi, I'm Neki. Is that a sweater?
Yeah, dude. Dude, it's the Hi, I'm Doctor sweater. Oh, dude, I see you got yours on too. Looking sharp, bro.
Dude, where'd you get yours from?
It was super easy, man. I just went on to our website, www.hiimdoctor.com. That's HIIMDR.com.
We have a website. We must be raking in cash from selling these sweaters.
Dude, we are killing it. I mean, if that includes losing money on every single sweater that we make, I think we're doing really well.
Yeah, Neki and I are donating all proceeds, which is zero, to charity because we are losing money.
I wonder if the charity will pay us. I think we got something here, man. Let's keep on keep on losing money on every sweater.
Alrighty, guys, go check us out. hiimdoctor.com.
We'll see ya.